Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of The Context. I am excited to be joined today by Chris Tankersley from Vonage. We're going to have a great conversation, a little bit about what they've been doing in terms of building MCPs and building MCPs for documentation and for putting an MCP in front of a very powerful communications platform. So it should be a really fun talk today. Darren is not with me today. He's not feeling the best, so on my own. Couple quick housekeeping things before Chris takes over. We are barreling towards the New York Summit for the MCP Dev Summit. It has been a crazy couple weeks. I understand we've mostly sold out of all the sponsorship spots, and the speaking is kind of nuts. I think as of earlier this week, we were at 235 sessions submitted for I want to say we're going to have maybe 60 slots. So it's unfortunately going to be very tight, and we'll be really closing things up next week at this time. So you have 1 week to get your talks in, and please definitely focus on things you think are particularly innovative, particularly focused on leveraging MCP to accomplish things. I think we're really looking for a lot of case studies. We're looking for a lot of people who are focused on the sort of rubber meeting the road. We've had lots of talks about where the protocol is going and what it can do. We'll still have plenty of a kind of protocol discussion, but really the gist of the conversation is going to be about leveraging MCPs and how are they getting consumed? How are people seeing impact from them? What are the right patterns that people should be implementing in their organizations to get value out of this technology? So should be an amazing conference. I can't wait to start announcing speakers and talks. That will probably be in February, but so far we've gotten some great talks, but there's definitely room for some more. So please get your talks in soon. If you have time, take a look at some of the back episodes of The Context. We have been putting out a lot of great sessions and discussions on all sorts of things. If you missed our talk on leveraging code mode with Anthropic, go take a look at that. That I think is incredibly valuable as you're trying to understand how to build MCP servers and clients. We've got a number of exciting talks in the work. We're actually probably going to be off next week. I've got a bit of a conflict, and I don't know if we're going to be able to do a show next week, but we'll be back the week after with the team at Appify. If you've got things to present and you're interested in sharing them, please scan the QR code, submit a talk. We'd love to have you on the Context, share kind of what you're working on. So with that, let's turn things over to Chris. Chris, thanks for joining us. It's going to be, I think your talk is really focused today on how to help developers kind of drive their productivity with MCPs, but also how you guys have approached that at Vonage.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Today mostly what I kind of want to go over is like what we've done to build out our MCP servers, like kind of what is our strategy we've come up with, some of the pitfalls that we've run into, because we've been putting this together for probably going on about, this will probably be our fourth major month of like implementing a strategy kind of around this. So thank you for having me, and I'm super interested to see what kind of conversation we get around it.
Absolutely, man. The floor is yours.
Sure. So my name is Chris Tankersley. I'm the developer ecosystem engineering manager at Vonage. That's a long-winded way of saying my team builds all of the open source tools that we put in front of developers. So our SDKs, our CLIs, all those things, including our MCP server. So you're not here to really know to learn about me. You're kind of want to learn about what we do. So I've got one obligatory corporate slide. If you don't know what Vonage is or what we do, originally we were a VoIP company back in 2000s. Nowadays we focus on communications platforms as a service. That just means we make it easy to add like voice, video, messaging to your application. And we've been doing that for about 13 to 15 years now. Time math is hard ever since COVID. But we also have some over-the-top services like being able to do multi-factor authentication across any of those channels, as well as some newer ones like device using the device for silent auth, as well as some anti-fraud solutions. Thanks to our acquisition by Ericsson, we can expose some APIs through the cellular network to make it easier to like help make sure that people are who they think they are with their devices. Now that kind of out of the way, my primary job is working on our developer relations team. What that traditionally has meant is finding and interacting with developers, kind of no matter where they are. That kind of traditionally has been going to events, talking to people, uh, getting feedback, finding out what works, what doesn't work. So this is we were just recently we're down in Orlando for Microsoft 360. This is not a picture of my talk that I gave there. They didn't have a good, nice crowd shot. But we travel to events, we talk to people, we do those different kind of things. And part of that is to bring you into our ecosystem so that we go to where you are, find you, and help bring you to us. We bring you to our developer center. We want you to start using those things, our Slack channels, all of those, so we can have a much easier interaction with you. I think one of the things that I have really started to see and I've really kind of started to hone in on when it comes to developer relations is that people move quite frequently and they never always stay in the same place. So, uh, just like you look at 10 years ago, uh, then Twitter, now X, was probably the hotbed of social media. Nowadays we actually only focus a very small fraction of what we do on that pool. Most developers have moved on to LinkedIn, so we have to constantly be looking at where people are moving to. And then you have things like something happened a while ago and then now online events like this are a little bit more prevalent, meaning I don't get to move around quite as much. So instead of Orlando, I am in uh, Ohio at my home, which it just snowed last night. I was talking to Shannon earlier. We got about an inch of snow outside. So there's no developers really here in the town I'm in, but we need to start moving to where the people are. And when I look at tooling, we want to make sure where people expect us to kind of be. Now, with that, I think what we're starting to see is a move away necessarily from like concrete packages and libraries and things. People have moving to AI in different forms, whether it is full on vibe coding, using it for code reviews, those kind of things. And I'm sure with this audience, I don't really have to sell the idea that AI is here and it's not really going away. So we need to kind of shift our focus to, if I want to be where the developers are at, they're in these tools that aren't necessarily uh, a package manager or anything like that. They're in Claude AI on their terminal running a command. They're in Visual Studio Code working with Copilot and working with those LLMs. So we want to make sure that we're where those customers are at and that we're providing the things that they need to be able to work effectively. Now, the easiest way we've looked into doing this is with MCP servers. Again, you're all familiar with how they kind of work, but we decided to put together a strategy to actually uh, build these out in a way that we think kind of makes sense to help foster adoption for our tools, but also help make sure we're bringing in people and helping them the way that we can. So I had a variety of motivations as I sat down and started to like devise this AI strategy with our company. The first and foremost was I want you to stay in your IDE. I like to call it stop coming to my documentation, because the more I can keep you inside a place and not have to break your work and interrupt you, the more productive you're going to be. So there's this thing called Carlson's law. Uninterrupted work will always be less effective and take longer than if completed continuously. Uh, this is a long way of saying those little 5-minute interrupts you get really make it hard to get back into the work you're doing. And I think traditionally this is applied to like, someone coming up to your desk and having a 5-minute conversation with you. I think it also applies to the context switching of moving in and out of tooling. So if I'm building something in Visual Studio Code, I've got all my key binding set up, doing all that kind of stuff. I know how to navigate around. If I have to drop out of that and go to a browser or a wiki page or something like that and start migrating around, that breaks my flow of concentration. I want you to stay in this idea of a flow state, which is where everything is kind of working properly. You're thinking about the problem at hand, and you're probably the most productive you can be. And I want you to stay in that as much as possible, but still get the help and the tools that you need to get done. This is different than the Balmer peak. They can happen at the same time, but they are not necessarily mutually exclusive or the same thing. But I want you to kind of stay thinking and working in the environment you're in. And we can do that with MCP servers and leveraging LLMs. So the first thing we did, which was probably the easiest, was put out a documentation server. These wire in fairly easily. There's a ton of companies that do this. And honestly, it's probably because it is kind of the low hanging fruit to show, hey, we're doing something, we're thinking about this. I didn't want it to just be the bare minimum for the reason we put this out. The biggest problem we had, especially testing AI, LLMs, and things like that, was out of date documentation. We have a couple of problems going on, some of them general, some of them specific to us. The first is training time takes time. If an LLM is published to the public, whether it's Chat, GPT, Claude, whoever, it takes a while for that training set to be built, and it's being built on old data. So that means as we have roughly about 20 different products that are constantly changing. It's not uncommon for that stuff to change in between the time data is gathered and that training set is finally released. So we wanted to make sure we're providing customers the correct information and most up-to-date information in the LLMs as possible. The other problem we have, which is probably a little bit more unique to us, not all companies, is because we are such an old company. Like I said, realistically, we're from 2000, though that really doesn't impact our code too much. We absorbed a company called Nexmo in, I think, they started in 2013. So there is code from Nexmo out there 2013. The LLMs know Nexmo is Vonage, so would quite regularly return code that was 2-3 years out of date. We needed to stop that because it was just giving bad information. And this was not because of us. I can go into GitHub, I can archive different repositories. The training set's pretty good at figuring out, like, don't press this up if it's old code. But we're a big proponent of open source code and putting things out there. There's tons of customer code that's out there that people did for demos or had exposed as other libraries that we can't maintain. I don't want Claude or ChatGPT to return those things as often. So a documentation server really helps combat that. We can also use that in conjunction with our SDKs and other tools to be able to return a set of documentation. And then because things like Copilot know how to run programs, can then turn around and say, I'm going to run the Vonage CLI, detect it's not installed. If it isn't, install it and then start to use it, or find the appropriate SDKs and install those things for you. So it was a really good way to make sure that we're setting customers up to be as up to date and effective as possible, even if they didn't have our stuff installed. The other thing was it was really kind of easy for us to do because we already had a chatbot on our documentation site. If you go and look, it's no secret. It's a chat system called Kappa AI, which is a RAG LLM by itself. So we could wire into that, expose that through an MCP server, and help customers start to use that right away without having to come to the doc center or our Slack channel to talk to an AI system. Now, ironically, we put that out. Kappa came out with kind of a automatic MCP server a couple months after we put ours out. So we're not using the official Kappa MCP servers, but they do have that if you want an easy way to put something in front of your documentation center to get an MCP server. Because we wanted to be able to expose things like documentation search as a tooling and push that on to the customer. Because at the end of the day, I want you to say things like, can you give me a code demo? And we return that. Now, the one thing we ran into quite quickly building this out was we a lot of times just could not get the LLM to trigger when customers would install this. It would trigger kind of haphazardly. It really kind of depended on what the question was being asked to actually like go along with that. So we learned we have to invest a lot of time in when we're designing these in our frameworks because we're just using a Node.js existing framework for this. We have to pay particular attention to the name of the tool. So we have like Vonage doc search, but also the description that is returned with that tool. So, here it's going through, it's like it searches the official developer documentation for guides, blah, blah, blah. When we published with just uh, one tool, we probably had about a 25% trigger rate, and that's probably being generous depending on who and what was testing. We really learned that we needed to spend time learning how customers want to interact with these things. So we had to think about what does the customer want to do to figure out what tools we needed. Then we need to figure out how would you ask for that? And you may get the same kind of question multiple ways, and you have to try to anticipate that so that way the LLM can properly grab it and send it. Um, and then we have to anticipate whatever information the customer wants to give us as part of that prompt. We found it pretty hard to have like a automated conversation like you would with like a command line to say like, oh, I need this and this information. You really have to set things up so that the LLM can prompt back to get the information it needs or anticipate what the customer is going to give you. The downside of that is in the case of like our documentation server, we ship 8 MCP tools. If you look in the actual like tooling listing that comes up, they all do exactly the same thing. They call the exact same internal function to contact Kappa and pass the query off just because we needed to make sure we're triggering when we expect it to trigger for a customer. If you were astute and paying attention to some of the slides, you may notice the sample tool I've been showing was the Vonage doc search, but in the little screen grab I did of Copilot, it used Vonage docs code generator. That's because a lot of times people would ask for sample code. It wouldn't trigger for the doc search, but we found it would trigger a lot of times for code generator. That way it would actually return it, even though it's just pulling from the docs. So we really have to think about like, what does a customer want to talk to the LLM about to give them the information back so that we trigger. Now, the next thing I wanted to make sure that people could do was actually get real work done. Documentation is great. That's probably going to be the bulk of what a lot of our customers do. But we also wanted to make sure that people could stay in the IDE and get real work done. For me, thinking about this from a developer centric point of view, because really we're giving these MCP servers away to install on your machine and run those locally. Right now, the heaviest use is developers, not end users. So we're doing things like building tooling that allows you to like list your Vonage applications directly in your LLM, to create applications, to purchase numbers, to get all of that going so that when you're doing all of those management style things, you can do those from the IDE without having to drop out of it into our customer dashboard and do all of that. We have a big emphasis on everything being self-serve. So part of that is we expose everything through APIs. Why can't I just have our MCP server act like an SDK for the LLM, and the LLM can just talk to our APIs directly? So one of the goals we kind of came up with is throughout this year, getting to the point where we are at parity with our SDKs. So Vonage itself ships 7 different languages, and that's kind of the same idea. Not every user is going to be using Node. Not everybody is going to be using Java. We need to make sure that we are where the customers or where the developers are at in terms of language. So we have a PHP SDK, we have a Node SDK, we have a .NET SDK, because those are where our customers are at. I want to extend that to being able to do that with MCPs as a source of that as well. They can use these with any of the clients that they use. We've tested them with Claude, Cursor, VS Code. So like, because MCP is kind of ubiquitous as a standard and easy to use, giving these to customers allows them to start doing this management work from their IDE without having to leave. So I want you to do things like list applications and things like that. Now, one thing that we haven't run into, but we're already looking at that is going to be a potential issue is context sizes. So LLMs tokenize everything and are designed in this like repetitive pattern where you're appending new text to the prompt, sending that back up. The more stuff you add to the prompt, the more tokens it uses, the more money it's going to cost. Because I would hazard to guess most of our customers are probably not using self-hosted LLMs for like the actual like big development work. They work okay, but with RAM prices, hardware prices, it's kind of infeasible to think that any of our customers are going to invest heavily in local LLMs. So, from one of our blog posts, we have this little innocuous thing that says that the LLM asks for the list of tools that's available. So you end up building this system prompt that over time is going to grow and grow and grow, especially as you're adding source code to that. It gets big really, really quick. I know if I'm doing a moderately sized app using Claude CLI, I can blow through the token limit that they give you per hour in probably about 20 minutes, depending on the size of some of my code bases. When we take that into consideration, plus the fact that when you add MCP tools, it takes the entire tool set and appends that to the prompt as well. So that way the LLM can decide what tool to pick. That grows quite large. And if I couple that with the problem I have with the documentation server, where I've got to anticipate all of the different permutations that a customer may want to try to invoke something, if I would want to expose an entire SDK, I don't even want to think about how many tools that would involve to actually accurately cover 100% coverage that we kind of like try to shoot for things. So we need to start thinking about before it becomes a problem, how do we help reduce context sizes, thereby reducing the customer's AI bill for those things. So while we haven't fully implemented it yet, we're looking at things like dynamic context loading, code restructuring to be able to do this. This basically will allow your MCP server to dynamically load a list of tools based on the user's prompt, basically at runtime. So I don't have to ship all 8 tools at the same time. Now, the documentation server 8's really not that big, but again, if I'm looking at some of our APIs, like our video API, if you want to do some management stuff from there, that is probably at a bare minimum 10, 15 tools plus permutations on all of those to trigger. So we need to start looking at ways to reduce bloat, whether it is sticking with MCP, offering LangChain server implementations to help reduce that. But also from a management standpoint, the less code I have to write, the less I have to manage. Because unwritten code is the best code because I don't have to worry about it rotting or dying off or needing to be managed. So if I can ship one MCP server that can dynamically load tools as needed, that's going to help all of our customers no matter what we do. And this leads into probably what is the next stage of our strategy is productizing these things for an end user. Primarily, we focus on developers. I can cut some corners. I can have some rough edges for developers, especially with newer technologies. But if I wanted to sell this to an ISV that wants to implement, say, like our identity services as a tool for like Agentforce, I need to make sure that it's easy to package up, ship to them, maintain, do all of that. The more work we can do up front solving some of these problems and being proactive with how we design them means it's going to be easier for my product teams to turn this into a product that we can more easily sell to someone. So that way they can integrate it with whatever bots they're using because they're probably one level above talking to a raw LLM. Ultimately, our goal is to turn our MCP servers into first-class citizens when it comes to tooling. I want customers to look at these things to be like, I'm starting a new project. Where's the MCP server? I'm going to install the CLI, whatever else they need, get a project up and running, and knowing that they are fully supported and they can get real work done, not just get documentation questions answered. So that's kind of a little bit of our strategy, some of the roadblocks we've run into. We've got a lot of stuff throughout the year that I'm really excited for us to work on and do. And it's been really exciting the last, like I said, about 6 months developing, designing, and then putting together the strategy and actually seeing it kind of come to fruition. So thank you, everybody. Again, my name is Chris. I've got some social media links for me, and I think we've got some links on the main slides too for like our corporate LinkedIn and all of that. But I'm happy to answer any questions for anything. And
Yeah, thanks,
otherwise,
Chris.
thank you all
This
very
is
much.
great. It's maybe first question was just this project. I mean, as you guys have been building these things out for your developers and for your clients, how much visibility has this had inside the company? How much have you had to kind of validate and justify this with management as like a good
Mhm.
investment? And how much have you had to educate people? Because I know a lot of people I talk to, the process of like, kind of educating the org and saying like, hey, this is where we need to go is non-trivial. What's that been like?
It's actually been pretty good. We've had a couple of teams already reach out to us from the product side to talk about productizing their specific one. Probably one of the earliest ones will probably be our reports API, which we'll be exposing in our developer tools here soon. Um, so it's been a fairly easy sell process. We have internally some like groups set up already for like how are we using AI? How do we want to use it internally for developers? How do we want to influence external developers to use AI and make sure we're on top of that? So it's actually been a big focus of our 2026 planning. So I've actually got a rough estimate for the entire year for everything that we want to do, and it really was not too hard for at least us to bring management on board. It's mostly going to be kind of scheduling how we want to make sure things go out in what order that we're providing the right value at the right time.
Do you feel like right now, as you kind of talk to your customers, right, the developers of your clients that are consuming Vonage services, like, are people actually using this? Like, are people building things that use your MCP as opposed to use your APIs, or is it sort of? I mean, there's a lot of hype, but is there actually anyone
Mhm.
using these things right now? And are you getting like tickets from people trying to use this stuff and it's not working, or they need more? What's the real world adoption? I mean, obviously your APIs are getting hammered, but what is
Yeah.
actually happening in terms of MCP adoption?
Yeah. In terms of MCP adoption, what we're seeing, and this is, I'm glad it's kind of like bearing fruit in the order that I hoped it would. We're seeing a large uptick in our documentation MCP server. So we can get stats through Kappa that show us as we've been promoting it more and the install base is going, we're seeing a nice increase in usage through the documentation server. So there is definitely a need for making sure that getting people the correct information that is up to date is a huge benefit.
Do you,
Um,
does that
say on
imply
the
though that
tooling
like does
side,
that
it's
imply
it's
that
less, but
yeah, Chris, does that imply that the main usage right now is like people using the documentation server with their coding agents to do sort of vibe coding against your API as opposed to just talking to the MCP? Like, I mean, I could see that making sense.
Mhm.
It's like we're not really using the MCP to access your APIs very much, but we're using the MCP, the docs MCP to write better code to talk to your APIs. Is that kind of how you think it's being used?
Yeah, and that's actually kind of how we expected it to be used. Because what we're seeing, we see a lot of talk about building AI bots and getting those to work and extending the functionality of those. I don't see as much real world implementation of that quite yet. So that was where we made a conscious decision to do the docs up front. And then I'm going to give developers MCP tools so they can do the management stuff from VS Code or whatever they want to use. Uh, we probably won't see a large uptick in the productized stuff like sending SMS or doing like number verification and stuff in an end user product. I would say so we're expecting probably about middle of the year to see a larger uptick in that. Because I think a lot of developers are still finding ways to get AI into their application. And until they figure out what that use case is, we're not going to see a huge uptick in uh, the, I like to call it the product MCP servers where they're getting useful work done through some sort of chatbot or some sort of other application.
What about internally? Like, just, Vonage is a big company. You guys have, I'm assuming, thousands of developers across,
Mhm.
certainly across Ericsson, if not across Vonage alone.
Yeah.
Dealing with MCP adoption, have you found that just in the Vonage organization, your teams are adopting MCPs pretty broadly? Like, they're using MCPs daily. There's more MCPs every day. Like, what are you finding?
Mhm.
Like, what are you finding the pattern looks like? Just like any other development org. What are you guys seeing, and how is it changing?
Yeah, we are seeing kind of the rise of like I don't want to say subtle MCP usage where nobody's really talking about it, but we are already kind of planning like what does that governance model look like internally,
Hmm.
because we do worry about things like Claude's recent terms of service change where you can't opt out of uh, not submitting code on paid plans. So we don't want customers to kind of like start installing stuff and we don't know where any of this code is going.
Interesting.
We're kind of looking into tools that help kind of like manage that and offer it up as a catalog of like approved tooling. And we do want to make sure that people aren't building their own MCP servers internally to solve a problem and then not at least not discussing it with everybody else. And then now we have 50 different internal MCP servers that are doing who knows what for small little bits and bobs. So we're kind of talking to the architecture team and being like, what exactly do we want to do to get ahead of that? Because it is hard. Once the cat's out of the bag, it's very hard to put it back in the bag.
Okay.
So if we can be ahead of that and say like, here's where you can go to see what MCP tools are there. Here's how you install them. We encourage you to use these. We want to make sure that we can do that. But we are definitely seeing an increased usage, not just in AI, but with all these disparate servers that are coming out.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, I was literally just last week. I was talking to an organization that had, I want to say, about their kind of assessment was they probably already had about 400 MCPs being used, but
Yep.
no gateway, no registry. It
Exactly.
was all
Yep.
being passed around in Slack, and they're like, we can't keep going like this. Like, this is
Yep.
clearly, these things are critical assets that need to be managed. They need to be secured, and they need to be auditable. And it sounds like you're coming to the same conclusion.
Oh yeah, yeah. That has been a big concern. We have an internal AI policy, obviously, for like what we can and can't use. So we
Mhm.
need to make sure that we're not stopping people from being able to do stuff, but still making sure that we can protect our own internal assets. Because while everything I do is open source, 99% of the code that Vonage does is proprietary code internal to things that we do that legally we uh, through company mandates and US government mandates, we can't have get out. So we want to make sure that our assets stay protected, but everybody can have the tooling that they need to be productive.
Yeah, sounds like audit, security, all this stuff is going to be really
Yep.
important. 2026 is kind of the year of, okay, now let's take these MCPs and make them, enterprise quality and
Yep.
enterprise controlled.
Hmm. Yep.
Awesome. Chris, thanks so much for coming on. It was great having you. I really appreciate you sharing the insights, building things for the community, and as always, kind of putting things into really clear, clear picture. So,
Again, thank you for having me.
yeah, absolutely. Thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll see you again soon. Have a great day.
Bye.